I'm like, why do I need social media? I probably don't need it as much, so I might take a little step back.
I feel like I've done that without like consciously. I've just been like, I can't handle it. Like, but it's, you kind of do need it. I don't know. It's like, that's the only way like new authors get noticed. And I'm like, I don't want homework. I want to just write novels. But that's a whole nother podcast.
I also just want to look at men and drag queens.
There's, you know.
That's all right. I mean, Instagram algorithm basically recommends nothing but both male and female cosplayers to me.
Ooh, naughty.
I mean, some of the females are naughty, but some of the males apparently she knows from high school. So,
ooh, very cool.
Let's start the podcast.
Yeah.
In love with movies. In love. In love.
Dani and Nic.
In love with movies. Da-da-da. Ooh, hello. And welcome to In Love with Movies. I'm Dani.
And I'm Nic.
And we have another voice here. Say hello, other voice.
Hey, friends. Thanks for having me on.
We have my friend Scott Mooney here today. Scott is an accomplished author and for real, like he made books. I don't know why. It's just so mind-blowing to me.
I made books.
You made books, plural, which is really great. And he's here to talk about cool stuff today.
Talk about love in his work, love in his life. And with that, Dani, what is this podcast in general about to all the new listeners out there? Hi, new listeners.
Welcome. Happy New Year. It's about love in movies.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
That's it. That's the whole plug right there.
A good summary.
Okay, we already introduced ourselves. So, Scott, do you want to, besides my obviously very professional introduction, did you want to introduce yourself, say a little bit about who you are and maybe how we know each other?
Yeah, so I'm Scott. I'm a writer and an improviser, originally from Michigan, now living in Chicago. Dani and I were cast on the same MINT team, a musical improv night team. That's not what MINT stands for, but it's...
I think it is.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Musical improv night team? That they can't stand for team.
It's like M-I, capital M, capital I-N-T. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Pretty sure.
So we were on the team Basic Instinct. We performed musical improv, and then we flew off into being an independent team, Monster Mixtape, which you've had many accomplished members of the team.
Basically, our whole team has been on.
Yeah, come to think of it, a lot of them. In fact, whoever hasn't been is probably now listening to this being offended.
Kelly, we got to bring you on, Kelly.
Yeah. Sorry. Did you have either Josh? No, Josh's.
Oh. Anyways. Yeah, so Scott and I have known each other for 3 years now, maybe? Or more? What is time?
Pretty close, because, I joined that team very shortly after I moved to Chicago. So almost my full time. And I just am coming up on 3 years. So.
Oh, yeah. And I remember he's taking my coffee away from me. You can't have nice things. And you moved to Chicago from where?
I was in England. I was in Michigan briefly, kind of between them, but I was in England getting my master's.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You went to Cornell.
I went to Cornell.
Not in England.
Geography,
no,
hard.
Correct. I did my undergrad at Cornell and then got a master's in film, actually, over at the University of Bristol in England.
Jeez, you're so cool, Scott. These are all things I didn't know about you.
I'm, I like to lead people with little breadcrumbs of studied at Oxford during undergrad too, just little. And
if you're just listening to this on audio, you can't tell, but Scott is flipping his hair when he says this.
It's a full back and forth. Yep.
Beautiful, luscious head of hair.
Yeah.
And it's just from shoulder to shoulder happening.
Eat your heart out, Jonathan Van Ness.
Oh, we just binge watched
half of
Queer. Oh, okay, half of
the new season.
Yeah, it dropped yesterday.
Oh, I've not seen it yet, but I will.
Grab your tissues.
Oh boy, I just watched the HBO series Finding Magic Mike.
Oh,
Can you tell me more about this?
It is a competition series where they take non-professional average guys and they turn them into male strippers. But it's about toxic masculinity and it's about them like finding their own magic, but also like stripping and giving lap dances.
Okay,
It's
sorry.
wild. I
This
watched it in
podcast
one day.
is ending early.
We gotta stop.
I have
We gotta
to go
pause.
watch this because I love competition shows. I love male
Yeah.
strippers. So this is right up my alley.
And that sounds like something you might need your tissues for completely different reasons.
Stop it, Nick.
No, but like also like I only watch reality shows when it's people being nice to each other, and it's like all these like guys just like being really close and vulnerable and being like, you got this, man. Like I know they do like aerial work and shit, like being, because it's about them. Like the prize is they get $100,000, but then they also get to be in the Magic Mike Vegas show, which is like that's a serious. This is not like, you know,
It's the job.
Yeah, and it's
not
like
a
they
cash
do,
payment. It's like
yeah, and the like pressure and the intensity of, I'm like, professional dancers, man, are next level. Which, yeah, and as someone who knows nothing about it, I'm like, I'm super impressed. I'm sure because Dani, you have a dance background, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was. Well, Irish dancing was like my main dance, but I did ballet and tap when I was little, and then Irish dancing was hard. Competition is even harder. Girls are very mean to each other, and then I broke my foot in a competition, and I was like, I don't know if this is for me anymore.
Fair. There is one scene with a dance injury. Trigger warning. Be on your guard.
wow.
Thank you for that. I love that. I was like, Scott, come to our podcast to talk about your love. And you're like, you know, it's really good. Males.
By the way, it's about them learning to love themselves.
And I really do love that. I was going to say, let's roll this back to the like comment on toxic masculinity, because that's something I think
Sorry, can you say that word again?
Nope, I'm not going to do it. So
masculinity.
I feel like that's, I mean, it's been interesting. And for me, we've been watching like Ted Lasso, for example. And there's shows, I think, reaching pop culture notice that have been pushing that envelope forward. And just, that's another one that like, you've got that, what's the guy with the rough voice's name? It doesn't matter. Hilarious comedian, has his own podcast, but he, you know, just this idea of like, gruff man, curse, and then like the vulnerability there and just all the characters kind of learning to, you know, show their softer sides. So
yeah, no, and I think that's a change, and even like in the format of these shows that they're like, yes, it's a competition series, yes, we eliminate people every round, but like the people are very nice to each other, and like the like coaches that they bring in are like very invested in like, we want to make people better, we want to, you know, this isn't just about like, we're gonna cut them. And I think back to stuff you watched in like when I was younger of you know, like America's Next Top Model, where it's like cutthroat, people are like, you know, backstabbing each other, and like that's just and there's still those reality shows today, but I think like that transition to like, let's just like maybe not focus on people tearing each other down and being awful.
That's refreshing to know that maybe America will be nicer again, nicer to each other.
Here's hoping. We're recording this fresh into 2022.
It's year one
to date this a little bit. So, you know, maybe it's a fresh start.
Yes. So back to you, Scott.
Tell
me a little bit more about I really am going to go watch that stripping show though. But tell me more about how you got into writing. And you want to talk a little bit more about your books too?
Yeah, for sure. So I wrote my first book while I was at Cornell. So interestingly, I was in a program that was sort of a like make your own major sort of deal. So I got an English major, but then I also was in this, it's called the College Scholars Program, and you got to kind of design your own course of study. And so I focused on folklore and fairy tales and their adaptations into modern culture. And so for that, you needed to do like a big senior thesis. And rather than write like a 60-page academic paper that just like your advisors read and then it's done, I was like, I'm going to write a novel that like incorporates the themes of what I studied, and just kind of like explores the questions that I was interested in. So I wrote Pricked, what became Pricked, during my undergrad. And now looking back, I'm like, I had taken some like creative writing classes, but to just be like, okay, and now a full-length novel like is not, I wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend like,
sounds uncommon.
Like do some short stories, like, you know, kind of learn your craft a little bit and then undertake that. But yeah, it was nice because it was like, okay, I have a deadline of like when I graduate. I started probably my sophomore year, and like worked on it while I was studying abroad in England. And it was, it's really great to like have that opportunity in a time of your life where you can just like write very, you know, you're still a college student, you know, you don't have all the same kind of responsibilities and things. But yeah, so I wrote that when I was an undergrad, like then was like editing it for many years, had an agent for a while. She was shopping it around. Eventually then the agent and I parted ways. She was like, I can't really find a place to sell it. I've kind of gone through my contacts. But then the publisher that I ended up going with was like accepting unagented submissions. And so she like was like, hey, you should try this place. I think they'd really like your work. And so that worked out. Yeah. And then so the first 2 books have come out. They are, I should actually describe what these books are. So on that theme of like folklore and fairy tales, they are urban fantasy novels set in New York City. And they kind of follow Briar, a young woman who lives in the 6th borough of New York City, which is the kind of like fairy tale otherworld, kind of underneath the surface of the real world. So in that world, kind of like all the normal fairy tale tropes and things are real. And yeah, she has various like mysteries and adventures and things. And the 3rd book is what I'm working on now and will hopefully be released before the end of the year. I don't have a firm date because it's not done yet, but yeah,
that's awesome. If you do find that out, let us know, and we will like additionally plug it, or maybe re-release this episode. Or if it takes long enough, then we could, you know, even push this. Or no pressure or anything. Not trying to.
Yeah. No, and that's a real gamble of definitely writing in the past 2 years has been a weird thing of like sometimes I was like super productive and being like, sure, great, there's nothing else to do. Like, let's write. And then other times it was just like, I need to focus on other things. But
yeah, my brain is not really able to entirely disconnect right now.
There's other stuff going on that maybe requires my attention. Yeah, no, it's been really cool. And just to kind of have it out in the world is super awesome. And yeah, like it finds its way to people. It's not it's always fun when like people I'm like, oh, you're not someone I know, you're not a family member, you know, you just kind of stumbled on this and really enjoyed it and are now hounding me about book 3. So
was it always meant to be a trilogy?
So the first book I definitely was just like, I know there's more stories here. I haven't wrapped everything up. I think it was probably like during the 2nd book where I was like, I think this makes sense to just kind of like cap it and do 3 books. And yeah, like, because I think there's weird elements of publishing that I was learning as I was going, which maybe I should have learned before writing a book again, rather than just jumping into it. But a lot of people like won't start a series until it's finished, or they won't buy a series until they know, because we all like binge watching.
Nobody wants to be Game of Thrones or anything like that,
right? Where you're just like, now I'm just waiting, and it's hard because it's like, oh well, if things don't sell until they're finished, like that author isn't encouraged to then finish that series because it's, you know, there's that gap of time. But it's cool. It's like a very fun, I've learned a lot about it, and the response has been cool to just like be like, oh, people, you know, are kind of walking through the streets of the city that I made in my mind. Like that's a cool experience.
Yeah, I started the first book, and it's not against you, Scott. I don't finish books. I truly don't. But my
you
goal
also don't
year,
love fantasy.
But I text you when I started reading this, Scott, and my goal here is to read more books. So I'm gonna hop back in. But I think your sense of like humor and in a weird way comes out, not in a weird way, but like it was like so enjoyable to me because the like pictures that I was seeing in my mind were also like weren't taking themselves too seriously. What do you call those little pigeon things?
Oh, pigeons.
Phoenixes
that are pigeons. Yeah.
That just made me chuckle so much. So yeah, I truly enjoyed it, and you can tell that like you spent a lot of time building the world first, which I think is what a lot of times I won't read books because of that. I'm like, I don't know where I am. I can't see anything.
Would you compare it at all to like Harry Potter? Is what, because I've not obviously attempted to read, and so like hearing just your brief description, that's where my brain goes.
Yeah, so it's like that style of fantasy where it's like it's the real world, but there is this kind of like magical element to it. So yeah, Harry Potter, things like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Dresden Files or yeah, like different where it's a
TV shows like The Magicians, maybe. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, I did get a couple people compare it to the Magicians, where it is like people in our real world, but they're dealing with these magical things. And yeah, no, I'm glad you enjoyed it, Dani. There's also an audiobook we just released in the last few months, which is really cool.
I think the last time I talked to you about this, I asked if you were going to do one because I pretty much exclusively listen to audiobooks. So is it on Audible or where can I find that? Because that's how I'm going to digest this.
For sure. It is on Audible. We only have the first book as an audiobook, but it's up and ready to be consumed.
All right, listeners, then everyone hearing this right now, I want every single one of you, along with me, to go download Pricked. That's the first one, correct?
Yep.
Pricked by Scott Mooney on Audible. I am literally going to do that as soon as we are finished recording, and I want everyone who's hearing my voice right now to do exactly the same thing.
And I'll be watching strippers.
That's what makes your relationship work, you know.
I listen to audiobooks, she watches strippers. You know how it is. So Scott, then does, with your character Briar and everything, given that this is a love podcast, does your character Briar have any kind of love interests, romantic situations, maybe entanglements coming in and out of them? How does that look like in the books without spoiling anything?
For sure. No, there is sort of like a little bit of a love triangle of she and it's funny how much so I started this book when I was 19.
Sure.
And I'm older than that now, so it's like funny how there's come to your own conclusions. But so it is like a very much, and the character, I started writing her when I was 19, but she was 22. So like in my mind, I was like, she's a very, put together, mature adult, this 22-year-old. And I'm like, joke. But yeah, so she has kind of like a love triangle. There's like, she has sort of this relationship from high school that is sort of this like simmering, unsure if they're going to kind of actually become a couple or not. And magical stuff has gotten in the way, of course. As it does, but yeah, and then she kind of meets a new guy, but that kind of, kicks off slight drama. It's not, I think like it's fun to write stories that are set in the real world because like everyone around her is like, oh, like it's a love triangle. Like, like we've seen these stories before. And she's like, shut up, guys. It's not a love triangle. But like it is of like there's the, just multiple potential partners. But it definitely explores sort of those issues. And so her kind of magical ability is she gives people emotions through roses. So she gives them like a rose that's charged with a feeling of like sadness, and then they feel sad. And so that's sort of like weirdly how she like solves these mysteries and like gets kind of information out of people. And so she's kind of very in touch, and it's fun to write a character whose like magical ability is about emotions, but she's like a 22-year-old who's kind of still learning about her own emotions. So it's kind of a fun, she doesn't like emotions and feeling them, but then that's like what her gift is. So
Scott, is there any part of you and yourself do you think in that story that you don't like emotions maybe, or
For sure. No, I think like definitely, especially again as a like 19-year-old college student, being like, oh, like it's, and I think like the story I wanted to write, in my mind was like, oh, it's like a mystery. It's like about this like detective kind of story that she gets wrapped up in. But then, looking back at it now, many years later, it's like, oh, there is that kind of vibe of how do you, use emotions? How can you manipulate people? Because she kind of comes to this conclusion that like, that's tough, right? If that like giving someone emotions, if that were possible, at some point she's like, well, you send people flowers to, cheer them up. How is this different? And it's like, well, it is. It's an element of amount and scale, but like what would you do if you had the opportunity to like change people's emotions? Is there like what morality kind of goes along with that? And or is it best to just like let people feel their feels? So it's I think using kind of magic as a way to explore those issues, I think was a fun way for me to kind of be like, oh yeah, like it's fun to write something that I didn't really have like this is the message I want to send. It was just sort of like exploring that and figuring it out as I went.
That's awesome. I mean, like personally, all I needed was to hear it was on audiobook, and then I was sold. But you, like, I am now like legitimately, this might skip some things that I even started already. So, on that same vein, you mentioned love triangles and things like that. Is there anything else?
Are you in a love triangle?
Not like right now, but maybe when he was 19 writing the book.
COVID? Are you kidding?
Yeah, still. No, but so is there anything else in terms of those romantic relationship statuses and things of that nature that also maybe come from your history? Or is there any other parts besides you dealing with emotions, any part of that?
I think so. I think there was definitely like an element of, because I was, in college and sort of like still, considering what had happened in high school, that then this relationship that I described of like having that person where you're like, oh, nothing ever happened, but like should it have, could it have, and then feeling like, what does that do when you're then trying to move on? And I think, not to get ahead of ourselves, but I think that like sort of ties into the themes of Enchanted of like, well, is there this idea of your one true love? And like, as a, idealistic young person to think like, what if that person is my one, will I ever feel this way again? Because whenever you feel something for the first time, it's so intense. And so I think that sense of like, yeah, what does that do? Kind of, how do you move forward? Should you move forward? Are you giving up because you didn't, give that relationship a try?
Totally.
I think there's definitely like elements of that I'm like, again, looking back, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That kind of echoes sort of, I think, what I was thinking about when I was that age.
I love that. And do you think, since you are more mature, what'd I do?
No, I did it this time. Sorry.
You're more
new pop screen getting in the way. I hit it and I'm like, I made a noise. Sorry, everyone.
Since you're more mature, like Nick, do you think this third book is going to reflect any piece of who you are right now?
Yeah, honestly, more than I want it to. Of like, I ended so the second book came out March 2020.
Okay.
A confusing time, to say the least. But I ended, so I had already, written the book, and I'd kind of had this plan for what the second book was going to be. And so it was like, basically it was about this kind of magical world being in crisis and kind of being a very like scary sort of thing that's affecting everyone's lives. And then of course COVID happened. So it was like, oh, now I have to write about this. So even when I'm like in my imaginary world, it's, and it's not a sickness, it's not anything like directly related, but I think it's hard not to think about that of like, all these narratives of people, saving the world or whatever. It's like, well, you have to kind of then put yourself in those shoes. And especially because it's a book that deals so heavily with emotions, it's like, what does that feel like? What do you do? How do you move past that and try to make a difference, make a change? And that's like too real sometimes for a fantasy novel, like not obviously what I was expecting when I kind of was thinking like, oh, cool. And then, what happens when, it looks like the world might be destroyed. And it's like, oh, that then suddenly became much more what I was dealing with in real life. So yeah, it's hopefully maybe there's some therapeutic thing like, okay, if I can deal with this in fantasy land, hopefully I can deal with it in the real world. But yeah, I think I think that's what's been the most challenging about writing this third book is like, okay, if like this is the just like an improvising scene, like if this is your set reality, you kind of have to honor that and work through it. But yeah, it's been a weird experience. And people even reading the second book that kind of set up these kind of scary moments were like, how did you, I was like, I wrote this before everything started. Yeah.
It's weird how that can happen. I think we were talking about Don't Look Up before we started recording, and very similarly, like I think had made it before COVID, and then like they were getting ready to release it and they really delayed it, and then apparently even Netflix had like some screenings that a friend of mine ended up getting invited to of like, hey, is this too?
Yeah,
well, it's apparently very reflective of it
for sure. And COVID, I think was I think they'd written it before COVID, but they might have filmed it during COVID, I forget. But yeah, because they were like, oh, this is about climate change, but then it definitely takes on a very different vibe of like, yeah, again, how do we handle or not handle these kind of existential threats, shared crises?
As Dani cringes.
No, so finding a way to write a book about that and still keep that humor, keep that kind of like fantastical whimsy sort of vibe, it's a tough balancing act for sure. And I'm kind of in it right now of like how to make that where this, hopefully I want people to kind of walk away feeling good and like, better, but also like, you kind of have to tap into some of that tough stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think that's something about, I can only imagine, because I've never actually created anything. And Scott and listeners, I want to apologize very quickly if you all might be hearing our cats in the room with us choosing to decide to argue while we are trying to record. So if that's...
I cannot hear them.
Oh, good. That's good. Then listeners probably can't either. But Danielle, I think, is going to get them out of the room so they stop distracting us. But what I was going to say is I think that those kinds of issues are sometimes difficult, and as a writer I wonder how this process works for you, where you want to bring it to a happy ending but also honor sort of the real process. And then in the real world, let's be honest, nothing, I mean, we talked about this a lot on this podcast, there is no happy ever after. Like, it doesn't exist. And that gets into Enchanted a little bit, and like everything takes work. You can certainly have a happy place, a happy moment, you could be in a happy space, an easier space, but it never is just like everything's done. So having to write towards the idea of I want to deal with these things, but I also want them to have a resolution, I can only imagine is very difficult because life doesn't tend to have those.
Yeah, and I think even the word you just used of resolution feels like, okay, so this, chapter, this, process or whatever's going on in your story is wrapped up, and there isn't that lingering sense of like, but what about this? But what about that? But then also, and I like that when, stories show that these people continue on in their lives. This is, you're seeing sort of this specific arc and this, conflict be resolved, but it's not, necessarily, and this is the only thing that happens to them, and then like everything is perfect. Because I think that is, in general pretty unsatisfying. But it's hard, and it's like, I think that especially while we're in the middle of this, I'm like, I feel like I could write this probably easier in the future when I have a little more distance. Unfortunately right now you're still kind of it also is not there's no ending to kind of the situation we all find ourselves in. It's how do you learn to live with it? How do you handle sort of the challenges that come up? Getting deep on in love with movies.
With the depth that we're in, I feel like now might be a good time for us to go ahead and go to our final segment in the love portion. If there's not anything else, Scott, that you feel like you need to get off your chest, or questions, Danielle, that you have.
Well, I was just going to say I guess final thoughts about like your love of storytelling in general and how it's kind of like impacted your life.
Yeah, no, and I think, what we've just been talking about, there's some quote that I'm going to misquote, and I don't remember who said it, but there's the idea, I forget who said it, but the quote is like, stories don't exist to tell us that there are dragons, they exist to tell us that dragons can be slayed. So it's that sort of like, okay, we know that stories aren't a reflection of reality. We know these things aren't true, but like, what about the way that we tell them helps us live our lives and helps like give us, that emotional release? Like, in a lot of ways, the closest thing to Breyer's magic of manipulating emotions is storytelling, is art, of any type, whether it's a song or a painting. You're, reaching into people's hearts and messing around with it. So I think that that's what I love about it. I think it can, that can be used in a lot of different ways. And I think does kind of then tie into what I think about Enchanted too.
I love that. And I also love that Nick, his mind is...
I'm like, shit.
I know. I should get that on like a painting.
Yeah.
Might be a little long for the live, laugh, love.
Sure.
But Scott, I think that's why you're such a good improviser as well, and why it's so... Well, honestly, I think our team is great. Obviously.
Yeah.
Monster mixtape. Make sure to look them up on.
Yeah, but I think that's why we are able to, like, our form when we are not given 5 minutes, when we're given a full amount of time, is to create an improvised sci-fi musical on the spot. And I think we've been more successful than not. And I think it's because we have people like you who just understand storytelling, and you're like, I know where something needs to happen, or I need to add something into this story.
Yeah, and I like what I love about improvising stories too is like, you don't, which sometimes I write like this, sometimes I don't, but like you can just say like, oh, this will heighten things, this will add to it, I don't know where it'll go, or like you give another improviser a really like meaty choice that whichever one they choose will be interesting, but you're still, people will be excited and interested in the outcome. So yeah, no, I think that is something that our troupe does really well, is if you don't care about the people, and because it's a musical that like already shows that heightened emotion, even when it's super silly, even when it's, like I can't even think of all the various like silly monsters coming from comic books or whatever.
I just remember a book eating someone. That was one of my favorites.
Wasn't Kelsey like Mrs. Kohler, like of the sink? Kohler?
Yes, she was. She was the evil heiress.
That's awesome.
Yeah, right. And it's like obviously a very silly thing, but like you get invested in like, like what's gonna happen to the characters I care about. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's a good place for
That's
me.
it.
That's
That was deep, honestly.
It really was. Our last segment, listeners, if you've been listening, you know this, and I'm going to take this opportunity because I keep meaning to do this in the last few episodes. There are some people that listen to us and support us very heavily on social media, and I'm going to call them out by name as a thank you right now. Brandy, Alex, Kelsey, Joe, Mike, Kyle,
Jenny,
thank you. Running in there with the last name. All right, so all of you, we really appreciate it. I just want to give a quick little thank you. If you heard your name, you know which Alex, which Jenny we're talking about. We really appreciate all that you do. And so thank you for that. We love you very much. But you all, those people listening who are not new listeners, know what this next segment is. This segment is called Closer Through Science.
Oh, I was ready with the name.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I would let you ask the question, and therefore I was going to give the plug this time. What
Okay.
about number 29? I think that's a little bit better.
Okay.
While she's reading that. So these questions, listeners, come from a article done by some social psychologists a while ago, Aaron et al. In 1997. Long story short, they figured out that they could make people ask these series of questions with varying stages of closeness or detail, and they could take complete strangers and make them feel much closer to complete strangers across the room from them simply by making them ask and answer these questions of each other. And therefore, we are going to go ahead and piggyback off of that work and have all of our listeners get closer to Scott and have Scott get closer to us by sharing some of his deeper thoughts. And has been a theme because we're getting further along in this. We're now in stage 3. So these questions are all a little bit more heavy than some of the others we've had. But that's why Danielle was like, don't ask that one. That one's too much. That's so Dani, what question?
Can I ask one question before this?
Yes, you may.
Is this, are there 34 questions?
It's 36 in the sort of full version because they've adjusted it, but 34 is the original, and you're probably thinking of exactly the study that we're talking about.
Okay, yes, I know about the study. Have you heard there's a musical about this?
What?
With Jonathan Groff. It's a podcast musical. It's like only audio, but it's, I think, is it 36 or is it 34? It's one of those two, but it's the 34 questions, and it's like about a couple who fell in love with these. I think it's 34, but I could be misremembering. But yeah, it's a podcast musical, like kind of springing off this idea of like, what if two people use this to fall in love? But then like, what are the questions they don't ask? It's really good.
God.
Yeah.
Now
I heard this on one of your episodes. I was like, I wonder if that's
it is. We've talked about it. It ends up in a lot of, it's a big enough study. It's definitely reached sort of popular lexicon. It's happened in a lot of sitcoms and TV shows, movies talk about it. So I'm not surprised that that's the case. And there were one of the things that happened as a finding. I'm sorry, now we're going off a total tangent. People hate it when I do this. Like one of the things that was interesting, because that's funny about the musical that you're talking about, is they discovered some people who were strangers and met like just on a college campus somewhere for this, like had a higher probability if they happened to be paired with someone who was, of the same sexual orientation and the same sex that they are therefore interested in, like skyrocketed their probability of ending up as romantic partners, even though that wasn't necessarily the goal. Just people 5 years later, when they followed up with them, were either in committed relationships or completely married by the time, because this stuff is real deep. It's the kind of questions, listeners, that you should be asking your partners or your love interests.
Well, Scott, after this, you might be a throuple with us.
Oh, yeah.
I hope your current dating situation is totally okay with that. I mean, no qualms.
I have one more question. Sorry.
Uh-oh.
You said it's a Jonathan Groff podcast. Can you hear the spit? Truly, he spits more than anyone I've ever. It's nasty. Okay, now I'm gonna ask. Okay, for real. Yeah. Scott, share with us an embarrassing moment in your life.
Ooh, is it bad that one just is top of my mind.
No, that's awesome.
Recently. So I was in I think it was LAX at like 6 a.m. LAX is, I think, my least favorite place in the world, and
not just least favorite airport, least favorite place.
No, it's I really just hate it. I spent the night there once, and it was terrible. But so in LAX, like, I don't know about you, but when I travel, I am very like, I don't know, like you wear sweatpants, you wear comfortable stuff, and then when people are put together, I kind of hate them, and they're just like, they were a cute travel outfit, and it's all, they thought about what they're wearing and not just like, how do I get through this? And so it was 6 a.m. It was the winter, or maybe I was going back to LA. I forget which airport, but regardless, there's this beautiful couple behind me. The guy is a serviceman. They have their incredibly adorable baby who, until the events of this story, has not made a peep, is just like loving life. And so I'm just like noticing them behind me in the security line, and I have my carry-on, and it's one of the like ones with the big handle, and I'm like trying to get through and like take off my belt, do all this stuff. And I had my carry-on like next to me, but it was not balanced. I didn't know that at the time. So I like set it down, turned to like take off my belt, and then it tipped, and it was like a slow motion to where they had their baby. It did not hit it, like the handle like tapped the baby's foot. It was like the baby was okay, no injury to the baby, but I was just like, no, like if this beautiful, like, this man has served our country, and I just, like the worst part was they were so nice about it. They were just like, it's okay, don't worry about it. And the baby's like crying. It's 6 a.m. I'm just like, this could not have gone worse. Because like, not that it would have been like, but they just seemed like such good people, and I hit their baby with my luggage.
Hit their baby. Can I tell?
That was bad.
That is hysterical. And sorry, I know I'm not supposed to answer this question, but the most recent time I was in LAX,
yeah,
this wasn't an embarrassing story for me, but Nick was getting some. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Nick was getting some food, and I was watching this woman sprinting, and no one else was watching her sprinting. I was like, "Where's she going?" She's going away from the gates. She was sprinting to the bathroom. She was wearing all white, and poop was streaming out her skirt, no. And she was just pooping across the floor and running, and I felt so bad. But no one saw it happen except for me. But then everyone saw the aftermath, where there was the woman who was trying to clean up the trail of wet poop, and she was wearing all white. And truly, Scott, it was squirting.
This is the sort of thing that happens at LAX. That's why it is terrible, and I will die on this hill. It's a god-awful, portal to hell, and people crush babies with luggage and shit themselves. So,
and the floor.
0 stars. Do not recommend this airport.
And so on that note, then, Scott, why don't you real quick, just in case anybody doesn't listen to the movie portion of the podcast, give us a quick plug in terms of your books again and where people can find it.
Sure. So the books are titled Pricked and Screaming Beauty by me, Scott Mooney. You can find them anywhere you find books. I recommend bookshop.org, a cool independent. They give money to independent bookstores when you order from them, as opposed to another big chain that I won't mention.
Choose not to give money to Jeff. That's what we're saying. Just continue.
Yeah, sure. I think we all know what we were talking about. But yeah, so that's a great way to order them. You can find them at your local bookstore. If they don't have it, they should be able to order it. It's pretty well distributed. And yeah, the third book, hopefully coming soon, later this year, completing the Poisoned Apple trilogy.
Very nice. Excellent. And so now, listeners, we're going to go to a quick break. But before we do, Scott, give us a reminder on what movie we'll be discussing on the other end of that.
We will be talking about the 2007 Disney film Enchanted, starring Amy Adams.
Yes, this is a great one.
All right. So we'll see you all on the other side.
I have to poop too. In love with movies. Da-da-da.
And we're back. Welcome back, movie lovers.
I feel great. That was a good break.
Yeah, listeners, don't know. That actually was not a joke that Danielle said right before the break. So we are all feeling a little bit lighter and more lighthearted as we go into this discussion of what beautiful movie, Scott?
We've been paused for 45 minutes.
It's a secret.
We are now talking about the wonderful film Enchanted.
Excellent. And listeners, by the way, in that 45-minute break, I went ahead and downloaded Scott's book. It is available for purchase in audio form. There's also, we gave some lists before the break in terms of places you can order it if you do like reading physical books. So make sure to go check out Pricked, and then maybe follow up with his second title as well. And now I'm already
Screaming
Thank you.
Beauty.
Screaming Beauty. But with that, we'll go ahead and we'll get into the opening credits of this movie. And Scott, it sounds like you already knew some of them and did a little bit of research. So please, both of you, by all means, jump in with any sort of little factoids or bits of information. But opening credits, the movie that we are talking about here is Enchanted. And as Scott has mentioned, it came out in 2007. So we're getting a little bit older, but still, a modern classic for sure. Starring the illustrious Amy Adams.
Illustrious.
For me, this was kind of one of her breakout roles. This was before she became, sort of Oscar-winning Amy Adams, but it was after she'd been in a couple of other smaller things. James Marsden, who played Cyclops before this, certainly part of that. He is. I'm just very, yeah.
Very
Sure. Objectively.
Fun fact: he also is in a much smaller film, the movie Sex Drive, which he plays sort of a sexually frustrated, closeted homosexual who picks on his brother for masculinity, and then by the end of the movie, anyway, it's really, I think, funny. It's a great role, and because he's supposed to be hyper masculine for 80% of the movie, he's in muscle shirts and things of that nature too. So, in case anyone's interested in that sort of thing, we also have Susan Sarandon. We got Danielle nodding. Those who, may be listeners who've listened to us a lot, you would know that we just recently discussed the fact that Susan Sarandon is married to the voice of Jack Skellington, which we had to look up and figure out it was her husband, not her brother or anything like that. Yeah. And then, of course, Patrick Dempsey, who...
Dr. McDreamy, right?
Yes.
Right.
And we will probably get into this, but I have the question: what the hell ever happened to Patrick Dempsey?
He's still on Grey's Anatomy.
I didn't know.
I thought he died.
I was going to say
Anatomy. No,
I
not in real life.
That show continues, bro. Yeah, Scott's like, dude, he died. You're a dick.
How dare you crap on his memory?
No, I just kind of wondered. He was it seemed like he was going to be a thing there around 2007, and then because he was in this and Maid of Honor and some other things, and then now I feel like you don't see him.
Yeah.
I think he's fine. He's fine as a leading man. So yeah. Fun fact: also, it's directed by a man named Kevin Lima, who also directed Tarzan and a Goofy movie.
Okay, I also absolutely love both of those movies.
I was thinking also amazing Disney musicals.
Yeah.
Really up there. And writer Bill Kelly, who I only credits that I also recognize from them is the Brendan Fraser piece, Blast from the Past, which
I don't know that one.
I like that movie, but it's a deep one, and not a lot other than that on that person's credits. I'm sorry.
Skipped the narrator, Julie Andrews.
I was gonna ask if you recognized her voice, because she's only got 3 lines or something.
No, I didn't realize it was her. Sorry.
We also Idina Menzel as Nancy.
Oh yeah, why would you not say Idina Menzel? What's her name? Edna Nazim.
Oh, Nazim. Yeah, John Travolta's word salad of her name.
Well, I also was trying to give you up. I knew you would not let me forget. I swear to God, I did not write it down even as I was writing. It was I'm not going to waste the space in my notebook. There's no way that Danielle doesn't bring up Idina Menzel. So
yeah,
Scott beat me to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
who also is underused in this movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is star-studded cast, and I don't know the other guy's name. Who is the? He's also in Harry Potter. He plays the rat.
His name is Timothy Spall. Oh, there you go, Scott.
I have the Wikipedia open. I'm not.
He's like, I'm cheating too.
Does he play a rat sometime?
Wormtail, yes, in the Harry Potter movies.
Okay, he is a rat. Okay.
He's literally a rat for the first 2 movies, becomes a human at the end of the third, and then is a very rat-like human being for the remainder of
he looks like a rat. Sorry to that actor.
Wow. He's a brilliant actor, but he does fit that role quite well.
He's made a career out of it, Use what you got.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I had something about the animation. I just wanted to say the animation, I think they did an amazing job, sort of in the beginning, representing the actors as their animated characters. I felt like they looked truly like the real person turned into a Disney-fied character. I thought that was a really brilliant job. But before we get too deep into our discussion, I want to make sure that we get into our love stories and our Danny's Dingle. So before we go into the love story.
Yeah. Let me speak.
All right. Well, this is time for everyone's favorite segment where Danielle will summarize the entire movie in a spoken word improvised poem.
Not ready.
Time for Danny's Dingle.
Ding.
Was that Ben Hebert?
Yes.
It is.
Well, it's been
No.
a bear.
Hey, Bear.
A bear. Sorry, my mistake.
No.
I never know how to say his last name. Sorry,
Yeah.
Ben. Okay. Enchanted. Low rent Cinderella. Waterfall hole. Sewer entrances. Chipmunk. Dr. McDreamy. Love? Wait, that was my love. Wait, love. Curtains. Multiple songs that are a bop.
Mm.
True Love's Kiss. Happy ever after.
Carrie Underwood.
Thank you.
It took me a moment to think about what the hell is curtains.
I was like, wait, it's not the end yet, is it?
I was like, is there a moment when like no, obviously, but she cuts up a rug or something too. She just basically
Right, true.
cuts
Fabric,
every
yeah.
fabric that she can
That
find.
Any
was-
textile.
Kind of a lame.
I was cracking myself up with that Danny's Dingle. Don't doubt yourself.
Okay.
Don't doubt yourself. It was
I do-
amazing.
I want to say before we get into our love stories, when Scott told me he wanted to, we kind of mentioned this at our little holiday party, and then you like reconfirmed that you wanted to watch Enchanted, and I was pumped because sometimes on
Good.
this podcast I have to watch movies that I don't like or that are dark or like make me
Sometimes
think.
80 to 90%, maybe.
I love this movie, so I'll start with my love story then.
Please do.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
remember the first time I watched this. I'm assuming it was in theaters, probably because I
Yeah,
would have
yeah.
been
Oh dear.
2006.
2007.
2007. Like a freshman or sophomore in high school, right?
Yeah.
I think.
Probably because
Yeah,
I would have
I
been
graduated
freshman
in
or
2010.
sophomore in college.
Yeah. So I probably saw this with like my mom or my friends or something, but
Mhm.
I just never stopped watching it.
Yeah.
It's just so good and so uplifting. And I think I own the DVD somewhere, but yeah. So I don't have a love story. I just think that there's no bad thing about this movie. I love it so much. And the soundtrack truly is a bop. Before we even started watching this, I was like, how does she know? And Nick's like, yes. How
That you
does
love
she
her.
know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
good.
it and that earworm will be in my head for at least 2 weeks.
Yeah, so good.
Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz as the composer and lyricist should
Oh.
mention them.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm
yeah.
getting an echo. Also, is that
Ooh,
new?
I'm not hearing an echo.
Hmm.
Oh,
Okay. It's just. Oh, it went away.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
We're good. Our audio has been sucking balls.
Yeah, it'll
recently,
probably sound
so-
terrible when we post this
Yeah.
anyway. I don't know.
Sorry, listeners.
We'll see. We're getting a new soundboard actually to see if that might help things. But my love story is also relatively quick. I distinctly know that I did not see it in theaters because I know that I kind of like watched it or saw like previews like, that looks like it might be interesting, the whole
No,
live action thing.
It's marketed as a girl movie, I think.
Oh, it definitely is. And I
Yeah.
was freshman, sophomore in college at a perfect time when I would have been ignoring, lady movies and things of that nature. But I think I have a vague memory of watching it on DVD as one of the many movies that I watched on the couch at my girlfriend's apartment in college. Like, so I remember
Did you
watching it at
watch
some
it
point.
or did you watch it?
No. You know this. When we're watching movies, if it's one I haven't seen yet, I'm watching the movie. I've literally been in movie theaters. I can remember Hidalgo. There was a girl in high school that I was trying to see, and she's like wanting to make out, and I'm like, fucking movie's on. Like, we got all of Hugo Mortensen on here. Like, I'm not. Stop kissing my neck. Leave me alone.
Hidalgo and chill? No.
Right, because that really sets the mood. That movie.
Mm,
Horses dying. Anyway, so mine's whatever. I watched it at some point on DVD and have enjoyed it. Don't have like wow feelings for it, but like it a great deal. Scott, yours is understandably going to be the best love story. So why did you pick this movie for us, and what does it mean to you?
yeah. So I think similar to Nick. I think it would have come out like my senior year in high school. I don't know exactly what part of. Oh no, I would have just started my freshman year of college.
So I'm the old part here. Good. Yep.
Real close. But so I didn't see it in theaters, and then somehow got a copy of it. I'm sure very legally on my hard drive, and it was just like that movie that I watched like whenever I was just like, I want to be in a good mood. I'm like feeling down, just like want to do something like, college ups and downs, like leaving home. And I was just like, this will cheer me up no matter what. And honestly, like, I think, I talked about how in college I did, study folklore and fairy tales, and looking at this movie and then looking at my book, like there's some common threads. And I do think as silly and bonkers as it can be, like it does ask some interesting questions about stories, about the stories we tell children, about, love and how we sort of market love to the next generation. And I think it's cool. I'm excited. I don't think we've mentioned it yet, is there's a sequel coming out later this year.
What?
They've
That's
already
news
filmed
to me.
it. Yeah, so they filmed it.
My mind is blown.
It's called Disenchanted, not to plug Disney Plus, but it'll be on Disney Plus later this year. I don't think it has a specific date, but I'm like very curious because I like the themes of this movie. I'm so curious how it would feel 15 years later.
And Disenchanted. Like, is it about them
divorcing?
Yeah, I mean, there's some themes of divorce in the first one.
Yeah.
I don't. I'm very skeptical of any like reboot, because it seems like that's all we do nowadays. And there's a Hocus Pocus 2 coming out this year too, and I'm like, you can't touch perfection. And to me, Hocus Pocus and Enchanted are pretty much perfection. So
legitimately, I feel bad that I'm continuing to do this to you, Scott, but no added pressure. I mean, the timing for us to release this episode would be perfect if it was just right in with your book coming out and also Disenchanted. So if it's both later this year, you've now got a moving target for you to try and hit.
For sure.
You come out the same month as Disenchanted, and we'll just put those out together. It'll be perfect.
Yeah.
Scott,
whatever works.
Tell Nick that you'll finish your book when he finishes his dissertation.
I knew that was coming. Touche.
Gauntlet thrown.
Touche. So there's themes within it, and you feel like it informed your writing and sort of maybe it changed your perspective on fantasy.
I think so. And I think, that was about the time where I was reading Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. And so that idea that these stories kind of survive and are important to us, and we kind of reinterpret them and reimagine them in each successive generation for whatever purposes, that our individuals and cultures demand. But I think that idea of like Disney exploring kind of the effects or the kind of clash of fairy tale fantasy and the real world, it's a weird film that I think works really well. And it's at the same time, it's very fun. I think there are those moments where you're just like, ooh, this, I don't know that it totally answers all those questions, or like, the idea of like, there is no happy ever after, which we've already talked about, but like, it's there's a lot that's fun to it. I think, I agree with Dani. Like the animation's beautiful, that like Art Deco, animated sequences, and the music is so good. I wish there was more of the music. Fun fact that I found while I was like poking around for this is Idina Menzel and James Marsden had a song that they cut. Stephen Schwartz wrote it.
Why do you have Idina Menzel if you're not singing?
Well, and it's interesting because she kept like getting that question in interviews, and she was like, I was actually very happy that I was cast as an actress, and it wasn't just about my voice. And she is great in this movie, underused, I think, as an actor too. But so they originally, the plan was to have them sing the title track Enchanted at the end of the film, and they were like, it just didn't work. Like it didn't make sense to, I don't know if they like recorded it, I don't know if it got cut in the script phase, but they were like, it was kind of like the end of the story. So then to have like this new song come out didn't make sense. But all 4 of the main characters are in the sequel, and apparently all 4 of them are singing. So
and now I'm like, my brain is this brand new piece of information is making my mind race in terms of trying to figure out what could be the possible storylines given where we left the characters.
We'll have to wait and see.
Indeed, we will.
I will say, I think that this is, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, Scott, that this is a progressive fairy tale. It's the beginning of Disney being like, what is it, self-realized or whatever, being like, oh, the stories we've been telling for the past 50 years, they kind of screwed up some girls, So, and then
and boys.
But after
and non-binary people, I assume.
Yes,
agreed.
All the humans. Disney really screwed us over by thinking there's always a happy ending, and so they started. This is Enchanted, and then from here became like Brave, Princess and the Frog, like all the female. What's the Rapunzel one?
Tangled.
Tangled, which is also a great movie, but it's going astray from the traditional like happy ever after, but they start it in the exact way of like, I thought it was hysterical. I don't know if I remember this. She falls on a horse and he goes, "What's your name?" She said, "Giselle." And he goes, "Oh, Giselle, we will be married in the morning."
Yes.
Like, that's their love story. And
Right.
that's a joke, but it's like, that's how all the other Disney
And
ones have really been.
I wrote this down, and I kind of remembered this from the first time I'd watched it, or I've seen it maybe once since then. But I also noted, like, now the way that they handle it is probably a little dated. But it was like you had to first start with this idea, as they kind of gave it their like a very farcical send up of, we really have an animated worlds, made it, the next day. And then the whole thing is, and this is where like I'm like, this is the part that's a little dated for me, is when she meets Patrick Dempsey, we've basically done a send up and said, no, that's not what love is really like. But then in the matter of 5 days, they fall in love with each other. And basically it's like, we said, this is not what love is like. And then the lesson is actually at the end, yes, it is. And you should be looking for your love happily ever after nonetheless. It's just like, wait,
right.
But I think the message is that love is not just this perfect thing. She realizes she's in love with Patrick Dempsey when he makes her angry, when she's able to feel another emotion.
That's a very good point.
And that scene, like, that's such a weird scene, and I love that. But like, yeah, because she goes through the whole like, oh, I'm angry. This is like a new emotion, which like Disney princesses, traditionally the ones that they're kind of doing the send up of, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, like, yeah, don't show anger. Like, are you kidding? But then she feels angry, and then she, like, let's be real, feels very horny. Like that scene where he's in the bathrobe with the little like chest hair.
Fast and woo!
Like, I looked at her. Yeah, her eye line is just like, his eyes are up here. She's looking down here, and then like, yeah, I knew that was like the like even like the closest to like a sexy scene this movie had, but like reaching like this last watch, I was just, yeah, that's a really interesting, like, it's her kind of then having these forbidden female emotions of like rage, but then also desire, and yeah, she touches his chest, and then like they almost kiss, and he leaves. And then it's funny because he wears the next day, he's wearing the same bathrobe with an undershirt to cover up that little triangle of chest hair. And I was like, yeah, like they knew what they were doing. That was like a very intentional choice of like, which is so funny too, because it's like a Disney movie, but it's like that like little bit of like, ooh, like a suggestion of like not even nudity, but a topless man. Like, that was the closest they got.
Shit up a topless man. Yeah.
Well, and it's rather, so they do the same thing with her at a different scene when she's like getting out and the birds are putting the towel on, and it's rather suggestive similarly, but you don't actually see anything.
The anger scene made me a little tingly because I was like, "Ooh, Patrick Dempsey!" Man, it got me. It was good.
Yeah.
Danielle,
no, I agree with Nick. Is that idea that like the moral isn't, it's don't marry the first man you meet, marry the second man you meet. Like, it's like, no, okay, like that's our progress.
Things, come on.
I agree.
I genuinely like your reframing of it, because I really was like, oh, don't marry immediately, but marry immediately, like, or like true love doesn't exist, but it really doesn't. That's what you should be looking forward to.
Yeah,
but I like your reframing, Danielle.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and I think it's like rather than the like idea of love, it's like the actual feeling of love, and that like, waiting or breaking off a relationship that isn't making you feel the same way, because like that's her kind of choice in some ways, is that like she's like, okay, I want to have a date, I want to actually get to know this person, and then that's like you can just see it on her face, as she's just like, oh, he's real pretty but real dumb. Like
James Marsden is perfect in this role. I was chuckling the whole time because he's like, he plays so self-absorbed but so unaware and so innocent and so dumb, all in very few lines, honestly. He's a great actor. His performance in Amy Adams, like when they have to do that like very like overblown, like they sell it so well. The only scene that like, because most of the time they do a good job of like, these are fairy tale characters like interacting with the real world. The scene where Amy Adams like swallows a fish, I'm just like, that's not a Disney princess thing. That's like, she's on ketamine. Like, what's going on? I did think that too. I was like, why?
What? Like, this does not make any sense.
Yeah, but Amy Adams also is perfect. The way she just like walks around and flounces
like
It's
in
just-
her
Yeah, and
body.
her little like balletic fingers, like oh,
Yes.
so good.
Yeah, so great. And I also think that Disney did a great job of taking a fairy tale and bringing it to the real world. Every single time someone came out of that sewer, I lost it.
Yeah.
The glitter
Yeah.
explodes, and then she's in this giant dress at the beginning, which is
Mhm.
hysterical. And then James Marsden comes out like a prince would.
Perfectly coiffed, and he's like,
Yep.
immediately in a perfect stance.
And then the evil witch comes out evilly.
Yeah.
But there's always glitter that comes out,
It's very
of a-
sparkly.
which is hilarious. And just the lines, I think, are very, like, especially at the beginning when Patrick Dempsey is like, welcome to New York. And she's like, thank
Thank
you.
Yes. Yeah, like doesn't know what sarcasm is even, just takes the words
Yeah.
at face value.
And then right after that, he's like, are you always falling? And she goes, well, usually someone's catching me. It's just so innocent. I don't know. I honestly didn't write a lot of notes because this movie is so great. I think they just do
Yeah.
a great job of developing characters. Even Pip.
Yeah.
Pip is the hero of this
Super
movie.
fun.
I would agree with that. In fact, it's kind of, I wonder about a movie where they let Pip speak in the real world.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Hmm.
I liked the character of Pip and his personality from the voice actor in the animated scenes. And I feel like some of that was lost, but the like it wasn't quite there.
That was good though. That was
Great. They can do charades.
and the director Kevin Lima was the voice of him in the real world, and then someone else was the voice for him in the animated world.
Pip was actually kind of New Yorky when he had a voice in the animated world. He was
Yes.
very sassy.
Yeah.
He would have fit in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's actually funny to think about. Like, oh yeah, he of all the characters had the best like kind of New York feel to in the fairy tale world.
And then I love in the real world, they just set it in New York so well. Like she calls for her animal friends and it's rats and pigeons and cockroaches.
Yeah. Well, and even that song, listening to the lyrics again this time, I was like, oh yeah, it also is like rather than the isn't it so fun to clean your house like women, like that song, the various like Disney movies have done it, but it's like cleaning up the scum from the like drains, and it's like very like dirty in a way that you're like, oh yeah, this is kind of like I think critiquing that, like just smile and do your chores. It's like, oh yeah, like you want to clean the bathroom, you got to clean the bathroom. Like, we know what people do there.
That's true. So speaking of love triangles from before, what do
Yeah.
we think about the love story in this movie? It's different than I feel like a lot of movies. Maybe not.
I was gonna say, is it though?
Well, how
Yeah.
would you feel if you were Idina Menzel?
Okay, so in my brain, I was thinking like Marsden, Dempsey, Adams.
Sure.
Shifting
But-
gears for Dina Menzel. Yeah, I have lots of thoughts.
It's
She
the love quadrangle.
was
Yes.
in my opinion totally justified in her response to when she first finds the two of them, and
Mm-hmm.
beyond gracious with how quickly she just sort of bought what he was saying and believed him. I mean, why did this? I did write this down. I was like, why in the hell, if he's got this mature relationship with this woman, does he not send her a text, say, some weird shit happened, I got a woman staying with us. He knows she's coming. We've already established that
Right.
coming the next morning to see the child. He knows that this woman he's now letting this woman stay there. Are they not speaking when they, go to say goodnight to each other? Like, there's just so many things. I'm like, how does he not inform her, hey, heads up, there's a strange woman in my apartment? Because I feel like then at least maybe like she'd have stuck around to listen to him, and he's like, no,
Yeah.
wait, I promise it's not what it looks like. Instead, it does look like he's like, oh, well, you wanted to, I love her. How did she phrase it? Grown-up girl time? Oh, so you can have some grown-up girl time here? Like, yeah, shit, that's what it looks like.
All of her lines in that scene are perfect. She says something about like, oh, I thought I wasn't staying over because, I was respecting your boundaries with your daughter. Turns out it was crowd control.
Yes, yes.
Idina Menzel,
Amazing.
get it.
Oh.
She does. I love her, but she does have RBF, and I think she gets cast in roles that are a little cranky, I guess.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't think we're supposed to be like, oh, like she's the bad girlfriend and Giselle's the good girlfriend. She's like, yeah, and I think but the way they like phrase that relationship when Patrick Dempsey's talking to his assistant is he's like, oh, like we've, gone over our strengths and weaknesses and we are entering, a partnership. And she's like, you're supposed to be in a relationship, not a business merger. Like, so I think it's that like, these are two people who it's that we've all had that of like, you look good on paper, this should work, but there isn't that like spark there. So I feel like that's what it is. And it's not that she's bad. The thing that I noticed this watch that blew my mind that I've seen this movie a lot and don't think I've ever noticed in the very end credits when Giselle has her dress business, she took over Nancy's business. That's in the same location because she was like a fashion designer, right? Because there's the scene where they have the birds and you're just like, oh, that's so cold-blooded. She stole her man and took over her business. Granted, she goes to be a queen, but like Nancy was wronged, I will say.
Yeah, now I'm like, well, crap, knowing that and knowing that it like obviously she wouldn't, have existed. Now I'm like, how deep did this go? Since they kind of swapped places in terms of, Adina goes to Andalusia or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Does she just like presume her identity and like all of her social security number, paperwork? Like she's assuming her business that, really don't have to change anything. Everything on paper is the same. All the plans are the same. It's still just a different woman in the shoes though. Wow. That's a good one, Scott. Thank you for bringing that up. That blows my mind now.
There's also
like realistically, they just used that location twice, but I was just like, about it. That's wild.
Yeah.
In my head canon, no. She literally replaced her. Her official name on her driver's license is the same as Idina Menzel's character, and she just, privately gets called whatever her name.
The other line that made me chuckle that's very realistic about Idina Menzel. Idina. I don't know why I can't say her name. I can't remember who says it, but it's like 5 years and you haven't proposed.
Yeah.
No wonder she's angry. Like she obviously has every right to be mad. Right. But she also, I think Idina Menzel, maybe the second movie will be her. I
hope it is
her comeback because she just wanted romance, and Patrick Dempsey didn't give her none of that, but gave it all to Giselle the second he met her.
Well, and I think that's maybe, and I'd love to hear you all's thoughts on this. One thing that did occur to me while I was watching it is like, is this also a commentary that we're saying we don't want just like flat out romance. We want to be realistic, but also all women just went flat out romance is essentially what's being said. It's because like we're introduced to that relationship as like, oh, they're very down to earth and they communicate with each other and they really have, boundaries and they know each other and they've been together for 5 years and they really, know each other's this and that. But then the moment he shows her even just a modicum of, sort of traditional romance, he gives her flowers, she is beside herself. And you could tell she's just been like starved for that the entire time. Like this man has never gotten her chocolates once. And I'm someone who likes giving chocolates and likes doing romantic gestures, but I also don't know that I love the idea of us setting it up that like this is what love should be. And that's all that love is. What are your thoughts?
I think that she just realized that like she wanted some of that and Patrick Dempsey never gave her any of that. It was too much of a business deal relationship rather than love. And I think that's just an example of it. Like she just wanted freaking flowers.
Sure. And
he didn't take the time to stop and say, maybe she would want flowers. So I don't know. I think it was realistic, honestly.
Well, but then she ends up with James Marsden, which is after like they've said 2 sentences to each other and they run back and get married. So I do agree that it's like, oh yeah, if she, I think there's a balance there of like realism and fantasy and romance and, pragmatism. But then it's like he says something nice about another woman and she's like, you're so like honest and forthright. And then like he puts a shoe on her foot and she's like, DTF. Like she's like
not even just DTF, DTM. She is ready to get married. Like I'm committing my life.
Her entire life. Like that's like you've been abducted to a cult, your support system. Like she goes to another world and granted is queen and like would be a better queen than James Marsden would be a king. So like I have a lot of questions about how like the monarchy in Andalusia works.
The stepmother.
So, the stepmother, we assume, so she married the rightful king and the king died. But then
I'm guessing, I think.
She gives up the throne if her son gets married, which is like a real weird, like that's not how Earth monarchies work, right?
I
like
wonder if
it might be like a certain age, but like I don't know.
The problem was him getting married. Clearly, that's why he was trying to get rid of Giselle.
Well, I wonder if it's like somehow a monarchy through women instead of a patriarchy. So it's a matriarchal monarchy, but sort of in the same way we would have issues today where, like, you know, if you only had daughters as a monarch, you would be careful about who you wed your daughter to, because whoever you marry them to would become king effectively.
Right.
Maybe the same, but the flip here of, like, she was stepmother, so we know that she married in, but she became the monarch when she married in, and then now
because she killed the king.
I don't know. That's
like
I didn't think that deeply about it, Scott, but now that you pointed out, yeah, that does raise some
questions. Yeah, well, because like, yeah, and Susan Sarandon's character, like, she's great. She's
crushes
just like a very fun, like, real life villain sort of thing. But like, her, in a lot of ways, she is just like, I just want to keep the power that I have.
Right.
She's, you know, and like I said, is James Marsden the best ruler? I don't know. Yeah.
It reminds me of what's that show that we watched on Hulu called Elizabeth?
The Great.
The Great.
The Great's a good show.
I haven't seen that, but it looks really
Hulu
good.
original.
And basically,
one of the Fanning sisters.
She's marrying in to become queen, but basically, it's because the king, the guy who's going to be king, is a total idiot.
Yeah. And spoilers for those of you who know your history: Catherine the Great she's called the Great because she's like the person who brings modern society and civilization to all of Russia.
Yeah, but the guy she marries is a
big dumb.
Yeah.
Played very well by Nicholas Hoult.
Yeah, very good. But I bought, you know, aside from all the rules and stuff, I bought it. Idina Menzel belonged in the romance world, and I think Amy Adams needed to have a little bit of realism because anger made her horny, as you said. So she wanted to live in a world where she could feel angry. So I think the swap worked out perfectly, and I think this is a perfect movie.
and what I will agree with is also, like, even if you don't, you know, I've been the only one who's been a little bit critical, but I will say, like, especially for 15, 20 years ago, whatever, 12 years ago, whatever it is, was very much pushing the envelope. And even now, sort of, it does at least suggest to the idea of maybe whatever your best love is not what you think it is. Like, I think that can still completely apply to today. Like, what you think you are looking for in a relationship is not actually necessarily what is best for you.
So, like, a difference between what you want and what you need, maybe?
Yeah.
I could see that.
And then we just happen to have two different characters who had one idea, and they were different opposing ideas, and they ended up being, you know, actually what they needed was just a perfect reflection of each other.
Yeah, that they found the person, and then that the kind of the feelings that they had then guided the way to a better relationship. Well, and it's like, I love the moment where Patrick Dempsey gives his daughter the book of, like, women, and it's like, that's a weird moment of, like, again, like, the feminism of Enchanted, but where that's, like, seen as, like, obviously not what she wants, where she's just like, Madame Curie died, and they're like, well, yeah, but also, like, advanced our knowledge and understanding, and, like, all these historical figures have died, to, like, get over it. But yeah, that sense of, like, do you have to choose one or the other, of, like, can we look at real world stuff or fantasy stuff? Because he's like, I know you wanted that book of fairy tales, but instead I got you this. So it's like a weird, like, I don't know. I don't think they're trying to, like, shit on people who are like, he's a single dad trying to build up his daughter. Like, I love that. But yeah, there's that weird, like, oh, you can only have one or the other. And maybe by the end, the idea is you don't have to choose one. You can, you know, have fairy tales and reality existing, I guess. Because, like, that's kind of what happens, is the worlds sort of are more merged by the end. But yeah, it's very interesting.
It is. You know what I love that I think is maybe subtle, maybe not? At the end, when they're all at the ball, everyone's finally in, like, royal clothes. And then Amy Adams walks in a beautiful dress that's nothing like a princess dress. And yet Patrick Dempsey can only see her as, like, his princess or whatever. I thought that was very sweet and very, like, telling of he's in love with this woman who he will view as a princess, whether she's in a fluffy dress or not.
You're my princess, my queen.
That's
But
right.
yeah, I like the arc that her fashion has, from the like
Yes.
wild, extravagant, wedding dress that gets in her way and like doesn't allow her to move very well, to the kind of more modern, like her hair's straight. She looks like a person who fits into New York City. But you're right, that's not the event. The event is a like
Supposed to be a ball.
powdered wigs and corsets and shit. Yeah.
I had not noticed the actual progression of the fashion until you just said it, Scott. Like, yeah, and I think that, like you've said on other things, I think that must have been a choice, because she literally can't get through a modern door, in her first year.
The hoop
And then
skirt
she's
thing,
the one
yeah.
creating her own, and I think that then also betrays a choice from the filmmakers of, she's making it and she's making like what she wants as herself, and the first one that she makes is still pretty darn floofy, pretty darn princess. The next one that she makes is like, yeah, it's got some flowers on it, but it's like much more toned down, it's much more sleek, it's much more modern. I had not even put that together. And then obviously the final one.
And then think of that credit card bill though after the shopping spree.
Yeah.
That's also a nice moment between her and the daughter, and like it gives, but there are so many questions, and I think it's because like we don't necessarily expect, again, for like a Disney movie, like there's the whole dead mom trope, but like they just say like the mom left.
Yeah, she wasn't dead.
Like, yeah, which like I remember my first watch of this, I was like unsure of, like, he just said she left. Did she leave the world? Did she leave? But yeah, I think it was like they split up.
Yeah, I think especially from the way
out.
that he's embittered, I think it was totally like she just
the relationship failed, and but then also Giselle's like, I've never been shopping with my mom. Why were you living in the middle of the woods by yourself with only animals? Like, what's your backstory? Like, we just don't know.
Going back to the point of James McDreamy.
Patrick Dempsey.
Okay. He like you just said, is very bitter about his wife, or I'm assuming wife, just literally walking out on him. That the reason Giselle is so good for him is because she brings true joy. And I think Idina Menzel isn't super truly joyful.
Yeah, very practical. But wasn't...
she's very practical. And so I think that's another reason why like her fairy tale-ness needed to be in the real world, and then Idina needed to be queen in the other world. That was what each of them were missing. Like, clearly James Marsden was just like, we sing a duet together, we're married.
Yeah.
And he needs a little realism, where McDreamy lost all his joy, and then Giselle's able to bring it back to him.
I like that.
Yeah. And
guys,
I think that
movie's deep.
And I think that fits with the relationship with the daughter, is I think for both at the beginning, like Nancy and Patrick Dempsey are both treating her as an adult when she's 6, right? They're like grown-up girl bonding time, biographies of great women. She's like, I just want to be a kid. And I think Giselle lets her be a kid. And they like have that relationship where it's like, it's, and I think that gets back to me to like what that kind of question is when he's giving her that book, is like, how do we deal with children and tell them like everything's great? And it's like, well, it's not. Like, the real world will kind of come crashing down. And he's like, I want her to be, strong and tough and be able to handle the challenges of life. But I think you're right, is that Giselle is like, I also, I want her to be joyful and to celebrate and like, dance in Central Park. So I think there's like those competing things. And I think the movie does a great job of not necessarily like coming down on one side or the other. For a Disney movie, which is, impressive.
Usually
but I think
one, it's like really heavy-handed with a single message, usually, yeah.
Right, yeah, is that it's like, okay, and I wrote down this quote because I feel like if there's any like central thesis to this film, it's what the divorcing couple that gets back together, the woman says, everybody has problems, everybody has bad times. Do we sacrifice all the good times because of them? When it's like, when they've gotten back together, and you're like, I think that like, if there is that, message, I don't know that it's just one message, but it is like, okay, whether that's a relationship, whether that's the story itself, like there's ups and downs, there's good and bad, but like, I think you can going to one end of like, everything's perfect and we can't talk about bad stuff, or everything's terrible and we like, any joy or love is a lie, is, just as harmful. So I guess it is a like synthesis of those two, some sort of compromise.
Yeah, I thought the message was very much on the same vein of like, happy ever after looks different for everyone. It's not supposed to be what we saw in fairy tales. It's supposed to be what works for you. Like, that couple hated each other and they were fighting over a guinea pig. Why am I? What
No,
were they?
a baseball card.
Yeah.
Oh
Yep.
yeah, I was like, why would I think guinea pig? Anyways, they were fighting over a baseball card.
Even
And
less
then
important.
Eventually get back together because like they realized that it's not always going to be happily ever after, but like it's worth it to work on it for the good times. And I thought that was I think rewatching this in a marriage,
Yeah.
like before I was obviously very single and flouncing around Chicago, and now that I'm in a committed relationship, it's very like, yeah, for sure, relationships aren't perfect, but do you want to just damn tell me how you really feel? Do you want to sacrifice all of the love and the good time that you have for giving up?
Yeah, no, I 1000% agree with that. The one thing I had a thought when I listened to that line is I agree. I think that's the central thesis of this movie. And it goes into like, for the time, I think that was hugely progressive. Today, I'm like, I wish we'd have done a little bit more in terms of exploring, well, what does that actually look like? Because I think the implication there is almost, if you don't dig into it, you could see it as sometimes things are tough, but once you've picked your love, you should just tough it out. Like hold on for when the good moments happen. And there's a part of me that worries about seeing abusive relationships where it's like you tell yourself, but it's when it's good, it's really good. It's just that when it's bad, it's hell. And it's like, that's not okay. But I do think if you dig into it, to what you're saying, Danielle, is it's like, not every day is going to be easy. We've talked about that on this podcast. Like, love is a choice, and some days that choice is very, very easy. Other days you're kind of having to white knuckle through it for a couple of hours.
Sure.
But that's, I think, very important, and it does at least break that idea that came before this in terms of fairy tale of like literally nothing ever is bad once you find your love. That's what happily ever after used to mean, is like, you find your love, you're happy, that's the love, that's the state you're now in, and you never have anything other than bliss for the rest of your existence. And it's just like, that is bullshit.
And that will lead people to, I think, because it's then if there's any little flaws, people throw away the whole relationship.
Right.
And I think, I agree, is that probably that a lot of people needed to hear that in 2007, but as a, guiding principle, it's like, that's not great. And I think like the ideas of like who is included in fairy tales also, like, there's a little bit of datedness to this. Can we talk about the weird leather daddy who comes into this film when James Marsden is looking for Giselle in the apartment building?
The door,
It's just like, that's wild that's in a Disney film. And I was just like, wait. And like, so bizarre, but also what conversations did some parents have to have of like, we'll see, because like and also in my memories of it, he was like much more intimidating. He's just like a nice guy in a leather vest and a headband, but like that being like a joke is super weird. And I hopefully would be dealt with differently today. And there's also, because that's also where he opens there's a few different door scenes, but there's one where that like, maybe early 30s woman opens the door and she's pregnant with kids, and she goes, "You're too late." And it's like, so like a woman over 30 or a gay man, like, they don't get the prince. Let's be real. Like, and that's like there's a hard line there where you're like, that didn't sit well. Fun fact too is that woman was the voice of Pocahontas. They like snuck in a bunch of Disney princesses.
Wow.
Where that was, again, I did not recognize her. I just looked up in Wikipedia. She's the voice of Pocahontas.
That you did research for this, by the way, Scott. This is like
I was like, ooh, there's a whole Wikipedia article on like Disney references in Enchanted. I did not read all of it, but the assistant for Patrick Dempsey's assistant is the voice of Ariel. The woman on the soap opera that they watch in the motel room is the voice of Belle, I believe. So it's like interesting, but it's also like, they didn't include Ming-Na Wen, the voice of Mulan, which had been out for almost 10 years. Not cool. She's great.
She's amazing.
She's the voice of Mulan?
Yeah.
Why didn't I go see her at Comic-Con then? She's way cooler than I even thought she was.
Because people are saying she's the first person to do the Disney hat trick. Is she's been a Disney princess, a Marvel kind of superhero. She was in Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Right.
And now she's in Star Wars. She's in the new Boba Fett film. So I'm just like,
and she was in Mandalorian.
She's freaking awesome. I mean,
she's so good.
Also, speaking of people, woo, hot. Oh my God, her
She's
Instagram is like I started following it for Mandalorian stuff, and then I was like, oh, Ming Na, damn, all right, you could get it. And she's like 50, 60 years old.
And she does her own stunts. Very impressive.
Yeah, she's a martial artist. I looked her because I was like, oh, like, what else do I know her from? And she's 5'4" also, which I'm just like, you're a martial artist and like a woman in the industry who's like a tiny little powerhouse and just killing it. Yeah. So if Ming-Na Wen is not in Disenchanted, we will all, cancel our Disney Plus subscriptions. I think that's a good line to draw.
Yeah, Disney. That's a threat.
Listen to us, Disney. Disney is very concerned with the listenership of this podcast.
Yeah,
we are small but mighty.
Yeah.
Well, should we then wrap it up? I mean, transition our Ming-Na love to our Enchanted love.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing, and it was kind of like a revelation I had. I don't know if it's a revelation, but after watching this movie again, I was like, this movie I love so much because it's also just like one of my favorite Christmas movies of all time, Elf, where they take storybook characters and they put them both in New York in the real world, and it brings the joy of like storybooks and fantasy into something that could be real. And I don't know why, that just gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Those two films, I've never thought of that. Like they have a very similar arc
plot where she's like, I'm figuring out like the subway and like things like that, and he's like, I'm eating gum from underneath the railing. So, and there's a revolving door.
That revolving door gag was
really good. Yeah.
So I think that just like furthered my understanding of why I love this movie and why I love Elf.
Fair enough.
Totally. That makes sense.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and start. I didn't write it down, but I think as we've been sitting here talking about it,
you give me your heart ratings?
I am. I think I'm going to give it probably, I keep going back and forth between 3.5 and 3.75. So I think I'm going to go to 3.75 out of 5 hearts for me. And while it is not it's not my go-to, I'm not going to like immediately go watch this again. I have enjoyed this movie every single time that I've watched it and would not be disappointed if it somehow entered my eyeballs for another time. So yes, I'll renew my vows as well. Dani.
Cool. 5 out of 5 renew for sure. I love this movie.
Yeah. I definitely renew my vows. I think probably like 4 or 4.5 stars. I like there's problems with the movie, but I do just like I think what Dani was saying of like that idea of like childlike innocence then like encountering the real world. It's like, yeah, that's like a great like coming of age, even though it's an adult character. Yeah, it's just like a great arc and a great story, and yeah, it's cheered me up a lot. And rewatching it this time, I was like, yeah, problems with it, but also it's a great film.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I love you, Dani.
I love you, Nick.
We love you, Scott. Thank you so much for being with us on the mic. Yes.
Thanks for having me.
And we love you, listeners. So thanks for hanging with us.
You want Scott to plug things?
Yes, I do.
Oh.
She caught me. Excellent.
He always turns it off.
I do. I'm terrible at that. Also, but yeah, Scott, please, what would you have to plug?
Sorry, you had something to say, Dani, or no?
Yes, you plug things.
Okay.
That's what she had to say. You plug things.
Yes, if you are interested in the books, like I said, they are Pricked and Screaming Beauty by Scott Mooney. You can find them basically anywhere books are sold. If you want to follow me on Instagram or follow me on Facebook, I'm at Scott Mooney Writer, Mooney Mooney, in case that doesn't come up. And there you can find when book 3 will come out. Your guess is as good as mine, hopefully before the end of the year. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And come watch us when Monster Mixtape is back in person, allegedly this year.
Question mark. TBD.
Okay, good. Wait, one more thing.
Uh-oh.
We forgot to say that this song, we said it earlier. Guys, this song, go listen to the soundtrack of this movie. It's so good. And I'll do my rendition of the Flash Mob. How do you know that you love her? How do you know that you really love her? Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
We did it!